I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, steam still hanging in the air from the hot shower, trying to focus on the interview ahead. It was the job of my dreams, and I was running through my answers, working to calm the nervous shake in my voice. As my confidence began to return, I suddenly heard a soft knock at the door. "William, are you in there?" Nora's voice was gentle, but something about it felt off, like there was an undertone I couldn't quite identify. "Yeah, I'm here," I replied, slightly puzzled but doing my best to sound composed, as if everything was perfectly normal. "Just getting ready for the interview." There was a brief pause before she spoke again. "Sorry to bother you, but I need to grab something from the bathroom. Is that okay?" "Sure, no problem," I said, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. Nora was always polite and considerate. What could possibly go wrong in a moment like this? When the door creaked open just a little, I caught a glimpse of her silhouette out of the corner of my eye. She was wearing her bathrobe, though this time it seemed looser than usual. I kept my focus on the mirror, wiping away the steam, trying to push aside my curiosity. She quietly approached the cabinet, but when she opened it in the blink of an eye, she was standing right in front of me. And then it happened. "Oh God!" Nora barely breathed the words. Her face was flushed, and I stood there frozen, speechless. My heart raced in my chest, almost suffocating me. "I'm sorry, William," she said, avoiding my gaze. There was something in her tone I had never heard before. A mix of embarrassment and something else, something that left me even more bewildered. My mind spun out of control. This was the moment that would split our lives into before and after. The next morning I woke up feeling broken. The events in the bathroom kept replaying in my mind, and I couldn't shake them off. I spent the entire day trying to get back into my normal routine, but everything felt foggy. Even the interview, which I had prepared for so carefully, went by as if I were on autopilot. I answered questions mechanically, hardly paying attention to what the interviewers were saying. My thoughts kept drifting back to the same images. Her face, her look of embarrassment, and of course the moment her robe fell open. Nora acted like nothing had happened. There were no awkward glances, no sign that she felt uncomfortable. But every time our eyes met, something inside me sparked. Was it really just an accident? Or was there something more between us that I hadn't understood? I decided I needed a distraction after work, so I took a walk around the neighborhood. I tried to clear my head, but every step seemed to pull me back to that morning. I couldn't explain it. I felt ashamed of my own thoughts. Ashamed that I could even think about Nora that way. But the harder I tried to forget, the stronger the feeling became. And that terrified me. When I returned home, Nora was in the kitchen standing by the stove making dinner. Out of habit I stopped by to say something, but my thoughts were still swirling in my head, and I could feel the tension building between us. "How was the interview?" she asked, smiling as usual, but her eyes seemed different, almost unreadable. "It was fine," I answered curtly, not wanting to get into it. My tone probably sounded a little harsh, but I wasn't sure how else to handle it. We ate dinner in silence with my father. Everything around us appeared normal, but inside I felt like a storm was brewing. I knew things had shifted between Nora and me, even if we both tried to act like nothing had changed. Later that night, just as I was about to go to bed, I heard a soft knock at my door. It was Nora. She stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind her, and paused for a moment at the threshold. "William, we need to talk," she said softly, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. My mind raced with the possibilities of what she might say. It was clear she wanted to address what happened in the bathroom, but I still hoped it had just been an awkward moment we could forget. Nora sat down quietly on the edge of the bed, and we both fell into an uncomfortable silence, searching for the right words. She looked at me, and I knew that this conversation would change everything. "What happened?" she started, but I interrupted her immediately. "It was an accident, Nora. There's no need to dwell on it," I said, trying to ease the tension, but she kept staring at me, and I could feel the situation slipping out of my control. "It wasn't just an accident," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't ignore what I feel." And in that moment I realized that we were standing on the edge of something unexplainable, something that couldn't be easily forgotten. The next morning, I woke up to bright sunlight streaming through the curtains. My head felt heavy, as if I hadn't slept at all. The events of the previous night echoed in my mind, and I couldn't find any peace. Nora had said something I never expected, though maybe I had just been too afraid to admit it. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts coming at me from every direction. What did this mean? What was I supposed to do now? Every time I remembered her words, something inside me tightened. She said she couldn't ignore her feelings, but what did that mean for us? And for my father? It felt strange, but my first instinct was to run, to leave, go back to college, and pretend none of this ever happened. Like it was just a bad dream. But I knew running away wasn't the answer. I couldn't just leave home without figuring out what was really going on. I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. On the table was a note from Nora. Her handwriting was calm, neat, familiar. "William, we need to talk. I want you to know that you're not to blame for what happened. I'll be in the kitchen later. Nora." My heart started racing again. Why did it sound so formal? It was as if she wanted to end the conversation once and for all. Maybe that was the right thing to do, just pretend nothing had happened. But could I really do that? Could I just forget it? I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. I needed space to clear my head and time to process things before facing Nora. So I decided to head to the nearby park, a place I often went to walk and think. The air was crisp and refreshing, almost as if nature itself was trying to help calm my mind. But despite the peaceful surroundings, my thoughts kept swirling, and I couldn't find any sense of peace. Her words echoed in my mind over and over. "I can't ignore what I feel." Those words lingered heavily with me, especially considering our complicated relationship. Nora, my stepmother. She'd been in my life for years, and never in a million years had I thought something like this could happen between us. She was family, someone who had entered my father's life and become a constant support. But now, every step I took through the park felt like it was changing everything. I sank further into my thoughts, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. Was it just the embarrassment from what had happened in the bathroom? Or was it something deeper, something I wasn't ready to face? I found a bench and sat down, resting my elbows on my knees and burying my face in my hands. My mind was a jumbled mess. I wanted everything to go back to how it was, to the life I knew before all of this. But now I was standing on the edge of something that could destroy everything. After almost an hour of wandering, I finally made the decision to head home. As much as I wanted to avoid it, the conversation with Nora was unavoidable. She was clearly waiting to figure out where we stood, and we couldn't ignore what had happened. When I walked back through the door, the house was eerily quiet. Nora was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of her, though it was obvious she hadn't touched it. She seemed lost in her thoughts, her face showing signs of stress. I walked over to the table, and when she noticed me, she looked up. There was something different in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. Fatigue? Sadness? Maybe doubt. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the nerves creeping up on me. "Hey," she replied, her voice softer than usual, and the silence between us was thick and uncomfortable. We both sat there, unsure how to break the tension. Finally, Nora spoke up. "I've been thinking a lot about everything." "About what happened?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She sighed deeply, almost as though she were steeling herself for a difficult conversation. "I never wanted things to go this far. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "What do you mean?" I asked, already dreading what was coming. She hesitated, taking a deep breath. "I know it was unexpected, and I can imagine you felt uncomfortable, but I can't ignore what I feel, and I think you know that too." Her words hung in the air, and I was left speechless. Yes, I felt it too, but it didn't make sense. I couldn't allow myself to entertain the idea, but how could I pretend nothing had happened? "I don't know what to say." I finally managed to get out. "This is all so strange." Nora leaned forward, her eyes softening with empathy. "I know, William. And I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now, but I think we need to be honest with each other." She paused, her voice becoming more serious. "This isn't something that will just go away." I wanted to say something to relieve the tension, but the words got stuck in my throat. All I could do was sit there, the weight of the situation building inside me. We both knew that this conversation wouldn't solve everything, but we couldn't avoid it anymore. Nora reached out and gently took my hand. The simple touch was enough to convey the emotional gravity of everything we were dealing with. I could feel the warmth of her hand, and it was both comforting and unsettling. "I don't want to hurt your father," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but she tried to hold herself together. "I don't want to hurt him either," I said, my heart aching. But deep down I knew things had already gone too far for either of us to turn back. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, neither of us making a move. It was a moment on the edge, teetering on a decision that could change everything. Later that evening, I returned home to find the kitchen silent. My father was still at work, and Nora was standing by the stove preparing dinner. The smell of fried chicken filled the air, and on any other day it would have made me hungry. But not today. I slowly walked toward her, feeling the tension between us like an invisible barrier. We hadn't spoken since she admitted her feelings, and the silence had become unbearable. Every gesture, every movement, felt charged with the weight of what we were both trying to suppress. "How was your day?" Nora asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a slight tremor in her voice, betraying her calm demeanor. "It was fine," I answered shortly, avoiding her gaze. I felt like any word or glance between us could trigger an explosion of emotion. We sat down to eat, but the meal was a quiet one, filled with the kind of awkwardness where every word seems forced, and nothing feels real. I was torn between the urge to run away, and the need to understand what was happening. Nora, too, seemed lost in her own thoughts, and I knew we couldn't keep pretending this wasn't happening. Finally, when we were both finished eating, Nora set her fork down and looked at me. "We can't keep going like this," she said, her voice soft but firm as if reading my mind. I met her gaze, and it was clear that this conversation was inevitable. We couldn't keep avoiding what was hanging between us. "You're right," I admitted, and the words felt heavier than I expected. "I don't know what to do about it." She looked confused, like she was facing a problem with no solution. "It's wrong, I know that," she said quietly, "but I can't stop thinking about it. And it seems like you can't either." I didn't know how to respond. All I could do was sit there in silence. My feelings for Nora felt just as much of a violation of everything I believed in as hers did. But denying them was impossible. She leaned closer, her voice soft and almost a whisper. "What do you think about all this?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I swallowed hard, feeling the conflict within me grow stronger. "I don't know," I finally managed. "I know it's wrong, but I can't stop thinking about it." Her eyes softened, and I saw something there I'd never noticed before. Something close to sadness, maybe even longing. "Me too," she whispered, and before I could react, she was right next to me again. Her hand touched mine, and suddenly the invisible wall between us was gone. The one we had so carefully built over the past few days. Her touch sent a surge of emotions through me, and I couldn't resist. This moment felt different. It wasn't like before. It was filled with everything we had both been trying to suppress. Her lips brushed against mine, and in that instant, everything inside me seemed to shatter. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of weakness. It was the moment when we both realized there was no turning back. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to change everything. I pulled away first, my heart pounding in my chest. "Nora," I started to say, but my thoughts were too scattered to find the right words. She pulled back, lowering her head as if she were ashamed of what had just happened. "I'm sorry," she murmured, but there was something else in her voice, something that hinted at the realization that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something neither of us could control. I stood up, unsure of how to handle this overwhelming new emotion. I don't know how we can fix this." My words came out muddled and weak because honestly I didn't have any answers. Nora nodded quietly but didn't speak. We both understood we had crossed a line. We had taken the first step down a path with no clear destination. I left the kitchen feeling like my world had been flipped upside down. The next morning everything in the house seemed calm, but it was the calm before the storm. My father had already gone to work, leaving just me and Nora. I didn't know what to do with all the emotions swirling inside me, or the crippling uncertainty that was slowly gnawing at me. We both spent the day avoiding each other, as though we feared what might happen if our paths crossed. But by evening I realized there was no escaping this. I stepped out onto the porch to catch some fresh air, hoping it would help clear my mind. The sun was setting, casting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The street was quiet, with only the occasional breeze rustling the leaves. I took a deep breath, hoping it would ease the storm inside, but it didn't. A little while later, Nora came out onto the porch. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. We stood there silently watching the sun sink lower, the silence stretching between us. It was the same silence we'd shared before, but now it felt heavier, charged with tension. "We need to talk," Nora said finally, her voice quiet but firm. I turned to her, already knowing what this conversation was about, but I waited for her to speak. "William, I can't ignore what happened between us," she continued, her eyes locked on mine. "I don't know what to do with it, but I can't pretend it didn't happen." Her words felt like a confession of something I had already known for a while, something neither of us had dared speak aloud until now. The silence, the kiss, everything between us had already said more than we ever had. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I can't forget it either," I admitted, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest I thought she might hear it. "But this is wrong, Nora. This shouldn't have happened." She nodded slowly, her gaze darkened by a whirlwind of emotions. She was clearly trying to keep herself composed. "I know," she whispered, barely audible, "but that doesn't make it any easier." We both knew it. Whatever this was, it was real, but it was also dangerous. We were standing at the edge of something that could destroy everything. And the scariest part was that neither of us knew how to stop it. Everything I felt for Nora was real, but at the same time it was completely wrong. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice breaking with the weight of the question, hoping she had some kind of answer. Nora lowered her gaze, searching for words. "I don't know," she finally admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "But I don't want to hurt your father. I can't live with that." Her words pierced through me, sharp and painful. She was right. My father didn't deserve this. He was important to both of us, and betraying him would destroy everything. But how could I live pretending nothing had happened? How could we act like everything was the same? "We can't just forget this," I said finally. "I don't know how to stop thinking about it, but I don't want to destroy our lives." Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw the same internal battle raging inside her. "I can't either," she said softly. We both fell silent, the weight of our feelings growing heavier with each passing second. There was no easy escape from this situation. We both knew that our world, the one we had known before, was slowly crumbling around us. Suddenly, Nora took a step closer. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she still wasn't sure what to do, but there was something undeniable in her eyes. A desire she couldn't fight, just like me. She reached out, and her hand found mine. The warmth of her skin sent a jolt of electricity through me, reigniting everything I had been trying to suppress. I looked at her, and in that instant we both understood. "Nora," I began, but I didn't have the chance to finish my sentence. She leaned in, and her lips met mine. This kiss was different. It was more intense, charged with all the words we couldn't say. It was longer, deeper, and filled with so much pain and desire that I couldn't pull away. We both knew we had crossed the line, but neither of us could stop. This moment was the culmination of everything we had tried to ignore, everything we had pushed down. Now there was no turning back. Reality seemed to fade away, and all that was left was us, our feelings which could no longer be controlled. When the kiss finally broke, we were both breathless, hearts racing. I couldn't believe what we had just done. But now everything was different. "We can't keep doing this," I said, barely able to keep my composure. "I know," Nora whispered, her voice fragile like the wind. But in that moment I knew there was no going back. We had crossed a line, and our lives would never be the same. That evening, when my father came home, everything seemed normal. The evening unfolded as it always did, quiet, with the soft hum of the TV in the living room and the gentle clink of cutlery on plates during dinner. It felt like nothing had changed, but I knew it was all just an illusion. Nora and I hadn't said anything about what had happened on the porch. We both understood that now wasn't the time. Not with my father here. Nora had slipped back into her role as the perfect wife, smiling as if everything was fine. But every time our eyes met by accident, my heart twisted. We couldn't keep pretending, but we both knew we had to keep up the act. The tension inside me was suffocating. I tried to focus on the usual distractions, work, daily tasks, but my mind kept returning to Nora. The emotional turmoil gave me no peace. We had gone too far to forget it, but we were trapped by the circumstances, unable to move forward. My father had no idea. He lived his life as if nothing was wrong, completely oblivious to the storm brewing right under his nose, something that could destroy everything he held dear. Sometimes it felt like I was betraying him with every glance toward Nora, with every silent moment between us. Even when she walked by, I felt the weight of it. That evening I went outside to get some air. The night was dark, with only the streetlights casting a faint glow on the road. The air was cool and I took a deep breath, hoping it would calm me, but the peace never came. Everything that had happened, everything I was feeling, felt like a heavy burden I couldn't lift. Not long after, Nora stepped outside as well. I heard the door softly click behind her as she walked toward me. We stood in silence for a few minutes, each of us lost in our own thoughts. It was clear we were both carrying the same weight, the same inner turmoil. "William," she said quietly, breaking the silence, "we can't keep going like this. It's killing me." I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw the same pain I was carrying. We both knew something had to change, but neither of us knew how to make that happen. We stood there, side by side, silently, both consumed by our thoughts. Nora, standing next to me, seemed as tense as I felt. Her words echoed in my mind. "We can't go on like this." I knew she was right. This constant tension was eating us alive. But what could we do? How could we navigate a situation where every step seemed like it could ruin our lives? Nora sighed softly, then turned her gaze to the street, as if searching for an answer in the darkness. She finally turned back to me. "I've been thinking about it," she said, her voice quiet but with a new determination that hadn't been there before. "We need to stop. We need time to figure out what we really want." I listened carefully, feeling something stir within me. This idea of taking a break, giving ourselves some space, felt like our only hope to salvage what was left. We had gone too far, and the only way to avoid total destruction was to step back. "You're right," I said, even though doubt still swirled in my head. "We need time to make sense of everything." Nora nodded, but the sadness in her eyes remained. We both knew this pause might not fix everything. It felt like we were only delaying the inevitable, but there was no other option. "Let's give ourselves that time," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "No pressure. No trying to figure things out right now." I nodded again, but the doubts still churned inside me. We couldn't let this continue, but stopping it felt just as impossible. When we returned to the house, it was like nothing had changed between us. Time seemed to stretch, and every step felt heavier than the last. My father was already asleep, and the silence in the house only amplified the tension between Nora and me. I went to my room, but sleep wouldn't come. Everything we had talked about kept running through my mind. A pause. How could that help when everything had already gone so far? I tried to convince myself it was the right decision, that it would give us time to heal. But deep down, I knew I was just lying to myself. Hours passed before I heard a soft knock at my door. It was Nora. My heart clenched as I realized she was back. I opened the door and saw her standing in the dim hallway light. Her eyes were filled with emotions, those same emotions we had both been trying so hard to suppress. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't live like this, William." I stared at her, unsure how to respond. We had just agreed on taking some time, but her gaze told me that no amount of time would ever change what had already happened between us. Nora took a step closer, and I felt all the walls I had tried to build inside me start to crumble. "No matter what we do," she breathed, "this won't stop." In that moment I knew she was right. We had gone too far. All the talk of taking a pause, of trying to figure things out, those were just excuses to delay the inevitable. I didn't know how to handle it. Silence fell between us again. We stood facing each other, and I realized that whatever happened next would change everything. But what could we do? Turning back was impossible. We both knew that. I wanted to say something, but the words never came. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back into the darkness of the hallway. Only then did I realize there was no turning back.